Welcome, welcome, welcome to our panelists, to our students. Um, we do have more students registered for this, so I believe we'll have more people dropping in a bit. So before we start, I just do want to thank everyone for being here today for our Careers in Mind Clinical and Counseling Psychology panel. In this particular panel, we're featuring alumni and community members with a counseling background working directly with patients or with a clinical background. And we will begin in just a few seconds as we wait for everyone to get settled in this minute, like the first couple minutes right now. And then for anyone on this call, if you ever have any questions, you can always put it in the chat if it's for like me or Melissa or the two of us support staff for this session. You can send it to us directly. But let's begin now. My name is Shay Andrada, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. And then with me today is Melissa, who's helping as our secondary staff. So we are both psychology undergraduate advisors for our department here in UCSD. And Careers in Mind is a virtual symposium where we host psychology career-related sessions throughout the month of May usually, and this year we're doing it throughout this week. So this is gonna be one of the last panels for Careers in Mind, followed by the networking session right after. So we usually have our alumni, so psychology alumni or community members to come and speak with our students. And this year is redefining success and cultivating meaningful careers. So that is our theme. We hope to explore the evolving concept of success and encourage participants to redefine their aspirations in pursuit of meaningful employment opportunities. And at this moment, I'd also like to highlight our campus partners who made this symposium possible. So we do have our UC San Diego Alumni Association and the Career Center helping us with the symposium. We also had the Career Center staff hosting breakout sessions throughout today too. If you haven't seen them, I believe at least one of them will be recorded and shared in the future. I also want to acknowledge the students on this call who took the time to be here today. So thank you everyone for taking this time out of your beautiful Sundays. So first of all, before we proceed any further, I just want to note that this session is recorded and will be posted on our Careers in Mind webpage for 2024 later in the month. So if you're on camera, please be mindful of your screen and please also remain muted until the Q&A session to avoid any accidental background noise disruption. If you have any questions during the call or during the panel, then go ahead and feel free to put in the chat. And then our panelists can always answer your questions, or we can also answer those questions during that Q&A portion. We also do want to recognize and honor the native land we are on at UC San Diego by reciting this land acknowledgement. So the UC San Diego community holds great respect for the land and the original people of the area where our campus is located. The university was built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. We acknowledge their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their stewardship. Also, one last thing before we do start the panel, if anyone is planning to use today's session for your careers and for your career and like psychology co-curricular record certification, so your CCR certification, go ahead and complete the 2024 CCR credit sign-in sheet in the chat. So you will want to submit that form just because you won't be able to have any tracking or any proof of attendance for your careers and your CCR Careers in Mind requirement for your certification. So make sure that is completed. And now we get to spend the next hour or a little less than an hour with our panelists today. So we do have 4 of them with us on this call, so they're all being spotlighted at the moment, so everyone can see. And I do have the great pleasure of introducing our panelists for this evening. So I do want them to all introduce themselves briefly by sharing their name, current title, and pronouns. So in the order we can follow is first Ellie, then Jojo, Angelica, and then Jessica. So thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, Shay. My name is Ellie. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently a Cyan lead organizer, but in the fall, I will be going to grad school for a PsyD in clinical psychology at the PGSB Stanford Consortium program.
Congratulations, Ellie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jojo Lee. I am a licensed professional clinical counselor, pronoun she, her, hers. Currently, I am a crisis response clinician at UC San Diego campus. If you heard about Triton Core, we are a brand new program started last March. So we are part of the counseling and psychological services. I'm very excited to meet you all today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angelica Quesada. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, as I mentioned, and I'm also the director of mental health programs for a nonprofit called Institute of Reproductive Grief Care.
And hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Townsend. I apologize. I tried to fix the video. It's not actually this blue here. I am currently a PERT clinician and team lead. So I'm part of the psychiatric emergency response team. For those of you who haven't heard of PERT, I use she, her, hers pronouns.
Thank you, everyone. We're super excited to have you all here for today's panel. And first of all, I want to ask if you can you each please talk a little bit more about your current role? And along with that, also what drew you to your current career? Whoever wants to volunteer first. Okay, Jessica.
I can go first. I'm really good at going first. So I think I forgot to say I'm licensed marriage and family therapist. So for those of you who don't know what PERT is, we're the therapists who ride with law enforcement to respond to psychiatric emergencies in the community. So probably my least favorite part of my current job is that I have to wear a bullet resistant vest, and the fact that it's called bullet resistant instead of bulletproof. And I apologize. You're also going to hear cats in the background. They don't like not being the center of attention. But I've been with PERT for 5 years now. What drew me to it was prior to this, I was working at an all special education school, K through 12. And for a while, I was the only licensed clinician. So anytime there was a kiddo in crisis, it fell on me, even if I was in the middle of providing group supervision. So sometimes group supervision was, here, watch me assess someone for suicidality and homicidality. And now here's how we call PERT and how we deal with law enforcement coming on campus. And eventually I realized I would like to continue doing that without the emotional burden of it being my day-to-day students, because that was really hard. I really would refer to it as like having to PERT my students really was pretty tough. So that's what drew me to PERT. And part of what I love about it is that I may see people multiple times, which is not ideal, but it also, you do still get that relationship, but you also know that you're getting them where they need to be for the time being.
I would like to go next. And hi, Jessica. So Jessica and I would used to be co-workers. So very excited to see her. And I would explain a little bit about what I do. Similarly to Jessica, I was a PERT clinician in the past. And what drew me into my current role is based on what Jessica explained. Triton Core is a hybrid versions of that. So we would like to call ourselves more on the mobile crisis response team. We are a team of licensed clinicians that we respond to any behavioral health related crisis on campus. So we serve our undergraduate, graduate student, extended study students as well. what really brings me to return back to the UCSD campus, several reasons. One's because I think there are not enough clinicians that serve in the crisis role. And I do believe that, especially in a college setting, it's a kind of unique populations compared to the general counseling that we're looking into, especially our Tritons here. We are a group of people who are highly competitive, and in a very tight schedule in a quarter system, which means that on top of a lot of the academic stress, there are a lot of other personal things that a lot of the individuals are struggling. And with that being said, we're also in a campus that deal with a very diverse populations. I would like to utilize my intersectionality as being a first-gen college grad, as well as grad students, as well as my language skills, because I do speak Mandarin and Cantonese, knowing that our campus does have a quite large of a populations, especially the AAPI community. So that kind of draws me back to return back on campus and serve our students.
I could go next. My current role is kind of a bit non-traditional. It's not particularly clinical. I was working in case management for a bit after graduating, and I came to realize that a lot of the issues that we face as mental health clinicians are systemic and issues that deal with law and policy. And so my current role right now is in the nonprofit sector, trying to understand how to advocate for um, housing and like more affordable housing within San Diego. And I hope to translate those skills in the future as a clinician and as I deepen my knowledge within mental health to across policy lines. And what drew me to this is just caring a lot about mental health and hearing this quote that said, like, you can heal bodies out of a river as many times as you can, but like at some point we need to go upstream and figure out why the bodies are coming down that river. And that really struck me a lot and made me like, if I truly care about mental health, then I care about all the other factors that come along the intersectionality of mental health that we deal with as a society at large. So yeah.
As I mentioned, I'm the director of mental health programs for the Institute of Reproductive Grief Care, but I also do private practice. And what kind of drew me to both is a little bit different. Private practice aspect is because I've been fortunate enough to be in an array of clinical settings, from hospice, hospital, inpatient, outpatient, working for San Diego Unified, working in group settings, working for practices where I would go to the homes to provide care for individuals. And it really kind of let me know that, oh, I would love to be able to continue offer this clinical aspect that is direct service without having to deal with a lot of the bureaucracy that sometimes comes along when you work for a hospital or an organization, right? However, with the Institute, it was also a series of what can I do to make some systemic change drawn by personal and professional experiences with reproductive loss that drew me to that type of work, where I am able to provide education and conduct research in reproductive loss and approach healthcare systems where we can do a gap analysis of their current policies and procedures to see what is being done, what kind of compassionate care is being provided for individuals who show up to that clinical setting with a reproductive loss, in the middle of a reproductive loss, or with a history of it, and then start making some changes with those, working with those individuals higher in the system, not just your doctors and your nurses and your social workers. We definitely work with them. We provide them with the education, the materials. We equip them to feel empowered to provide that compassionate care. But it's also over here higher with the bureaucracy that I was trying to run away from, providing them just the guidance and understanding how can you incorporate this with your limitations, whether if that's funding or policies and procedures that have been in place since this establishment got established, and now it's really difficult at times to make those changes.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for sharing. There's, many different experiences in this group of people. And I hope that, again, our students are going to gain a lot from this experience, being here in this panel. And then also feel free, for all our participants, feel free to put those questions in the chat if you have any questions. And then Melissa will let us know if there's anything that does pop up, any questions. Our next question for our panel is relating back to, our students being undergraduate students. What undergraduate experiences most benefited your career exploration post UC San Diego, whether it's like academic, personal, co-curricular experiences, and even just like what advice would you offer undergrad psychology students who are considering pursuing a career in your field of clinical or counseling psychology, again, like pertaining to like relevant experiences? It could be like preparing for graduate studies, preparing for this field, skills, but again, like if you have anything to share on that.
I wouldn't mind going first for this question. One of the things I always like to encourage is try to volunteer, do internships, get involved with things that you think would help you in your career, but also that you feel passionate about. In addition, I know sometimes because fellow alumni, I was there at UCSD, I know how competitive it is, I know how hard it is. As a first generation Mexican American with absolute no guidance, no cousin that I could ask or look forward to get some guidance, you're navigating sometimes that world where you have no idea what you're doing. But I would encourage you to take classes that interest you, even if you think that class is going to be really hard. And I know sometimes we really worry about getting that GPA, getting those big grades, right? But if you find classes that interest you, capture your attention, that maybe not necessarily are under the psych program, maybe it's under a different program, you might find yourself actually that a lot of the things that you're doing for your degree could be married with this other field, or could be sparking an interest in you that maybe you would have never thought of because you didn't give yourself the chance to maybe make a mistake, and that's okay.
Yes, that's really great advice. Especially like with the courses, it's really, just really you want to gain out of the experiences. And I think one of our future questions is about like success and what we define as success, but I'll leave it for later. I would love to hear from other panelists about, again, the question was your advice or your undergrad experiences that helped you.
I could go next. I think it's really important to take time to get really introspective about what you want out of a career, especially within clinical and counseling psychology, because if you're interested in this aspect of psychology for a field, there are so many options like master's degrees, doctorate degrees, or doing just various other things. Like you see professional people doing so many things in different sectors of our society too. And so because there are so many options, it makes so much sense for you to be uncertain if you are feeling that way. You're most likely feeling that way because there's so many choices, right? It's like you're picking what type of candy to eat kind of situation. So take the time to figure out what values you really want in out of a job. Do you want diversity out of it? If you solely want private practice, then the best degree for you could be certain ones versus others, right? And I think also going through, like, if you do decide to go to grad school, there's also like the interview stages with graduate schools and going through all of that. It's really scary no matter whether you're within psychology or outside of psychology, and being really certain that this is what you want to do with your life helps a lot when you're going through those interviews. And like I think it just helps a lot when you're very certain. And that certainty only comes after you've done the really deep introspective work of who you are as a person and why this truly is the best fit for you.
I want to share that I like Ellie, you used the word which candy to pick because there's so many of them on this campus. I reflect back on the time that I was at UCSD. On top of the psychology classes, there's several things that I reflect back and it was very beneficial for me. One was taking some marketing class in Radies, at the Radies School of Management, because I did not know that I need a marketing class as a licensed clinicians now, that if I want to do anything about in the private practice or start my own business, I do need the marketing skills. I also appreciate that I took the time to reach out to the career center and ask them to revise my resume over and over again because I would imagine during the job hunting season, I was struggling, what can I include in my resume? Because every single job required experience. When as an undergrad, we can only have so much experience. So even that, just to have another set of eyes to guide me through my resume, that was very helpful. I did multiple kind of like volunteer. One was actually CalPERCH, I think it's the California Public Interest, some sort of like resource group. And I believe it's still existing on the campus, where it's like they sometimes ask you to donate money from your student fee. But I would like to say that one of my success story that I can share, when I was a student there, one of our biggest campaign is to have the trolley stations come to campus. And here we are, maybe after a decade and later, there is a trolley station here at the campus. So even just seeing that, I feel pretty proud that I was part of that campaign when I was a student. And throughout that process, it was challenging. It's definitely step out of my comfort zone because I need to reach out to stranger and asking them to share their interests and maybe donate money to the organization. I think it's because of those experience when you step out of your comfort zone, doing things that you normally won't even consider. And now you reflect back, it's like, wow, thank you so much that I actually did that to myself. And I also want to highlight that when it comes to clinical or counseling psychology, what we're doing is really just hearing people's story, helping them, guide them through their journey. What becomes quite important as a clinician is that we kind of need to know a lot of different things. So just might as well be really interested in your hobby and dive deep into it, because whatever that you're interested in, there will be clients that come to you and be like, oh my goodness, thank you for sharing your interest with me. I feel so heard. I feel seen at this moment. So I think that no matter what you do at UCSD at this moment, no matter you're freshman all the way to senior, go take those classes that even if you feel like it's not psychology related, eventually you will find it helpful. And second, go join those organizations, those internship on campus. If you don't have a car, there are still a lot of opportunity on campus, and utilize the career center because there are a lot of resources in that center.
Okay, there we go. Finally unmuted. Sorry. So I think I'm going to talk about some other stuff because everything that was talked about is all very important. I think as a clinician, one of the things that I've really learned is the importance of having an identity outside of your professional identity. So I'm a therapist. Yes, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a PERT clinician. I'm all of those things, but I'm a person. And so when I reflect back on my time at UCSD, one of the things, this is going to be very non-traditional. I was in the DJs and Vinyl Files Club, which I believe is now just called DVC. And that really developed a lot of different skills because back in more years ago than I care to state, when I was at UCSD, the DJs and Vinyl Files Club actually almost got shut down. At that time, I was vice president of internal affairs, which sounds so fancy. It just meant I dealt with the membership and anything on campus. So I had to work with the administration to create rules that the club could still function within, and that would keep the administration from shutting us down, and come up with like a progressive stepped process for how those restrictions could become looser over time. And so that's not something that traditionally sounds like anything having to do with therapy. It turns out that if you're throwing parties, which is what we did, we threw raves on the UCSD campus. One of them was so big, that's what got us in trouble. But there's that organizational piece of party planning. There's the ability to communicate with others. There's that negotiation, because I will tell you, for most people, when you're coming out of a graduate program, you're going to be working in some type of community mental health. And having the ability to understand how to exist within those structures is really important. And I took a less traditional path even though I knew when I was 15 I wanted to be a therapist. Although at the time all I knew was clinical psychologist. All of the skills that I learned, you just figure out how to apply them. So I do think it's important to do the introspection, but I also want you to know it's really important to be you as a human, because one thing I think that UCSD does really well is prepare us to go on to graduate school. It does not necessarily prepare us to be humans existing in the world. And as therapists, like Jojo mentioned, and it is wonderful to see Jojo, like when we worked together, we didn't see each other this much. You really have to be more than a therapist. You have to be more than these titles, and, really like finding all of those interests and developing who you are as a whole person, so that when you have a client come sit with you in whatever capacity that is, whether it's private practice, whether it's in a school setting, whether it's groups, whatever, case management, all of those, so that you have some richness of experience to pull from. Because I guarantee you, any client you sit down with is going to want to know a little bit about you, and it's up to you how much you say. But really having experiences with a broad range of different people really helps you be present for all of your clients. So you can take a less traditional path and still end up where you want to be.
Really wonderful to hear from everyone. I guess Jessica, what you just mentioned just reminded me, or leads on to the next question about what are some misconceptions that people have about your role, and then also how do you address them to other people, and to also how do you address it to yourself so that you have like your own boundaries, especially with misconceptions that people may have.
I can start since we're just kind of talking about it. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that therapists have it all together and we have all the answers. That's just with the public. And then there's of course the stigma about therapy. But I think for us within ourselves, one of the biggest misconceptions that I've been a clinical supervisor in the past as well, and what I've seen with everybody, even myself going through it, is that feeling like you need to fix, especially early on in your career. And you don't need to fix. Like Jojo mentioned, you're sitting with people in some of the darkest thoughts that they have, whether it's in the emergency setting or not. And it's really being able to be comfortable with discomfort, and working on yourself and what you can do. So for me, it really is one of my main passions outside of therapy is dance. So my identity outside of therapy is primarily as a dancer. And so I really prioritize that time. When I am off work, I'm off work. That's another nice thing about my current position, that I can really be off when I'm off, because I'm not worried about like, how are they going to show up in my office next week? Did they do their homework or not? Because I have had private practice that dealt with that. And then obviously, just as a PERT clinician, there are a lot of misconceptions. We are not crisis negotiators. We don't run in first. We are not the ones who are supposed to be de-escalating. We help after. We can help the crisis negotiators. We can help law enforcement, give them that information to help them, try to de-escalate someone and get them safe. And then we get them connected to help. So kind of two-pronged, and I'll leave room for everybody else.
I don't mind going next. I'm going to bring it from my cultural perspective. When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and I'm like, I want to be a doctor, and everybody's great. You're going to be a doctor. We're going to have a doctor in the family. And then when I changed my mind, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be a therapist. Everybody that was cheering was kind of like, huh? Like, why would you do that? Why would you want to work with crazy people all day? And that's one of the biggest things that people think, right, of mental health sometimes is just for quote unquote crazy people. And I've had family members specifically say this, and having the realization that you're going to have to sometimes educate those around you of mental health is really for everyone. Everybody can benefit. And of course, if you ever then feel comfortable sharing, if you have your own personal experiences, and I recommend everybody to go to therapy, whether if you have a clinical diagnosis or if you don't, because we all have challenges, we all have struggles, and sometimes it's a lot. And when you feel like you have a space to share it, where not somebody's already trying to fix it, right? Or somebody is trying to judge you for it, or even just you yourself, you're not like almost hushed with a thought of like, oh, I can't believe I had that thought, but you can openly express it. There's a big beauty in having that space. So breaking that mental stigma of mental health being for crazy people, or that us as therapists, we don't need therapy. Plenty of therapists for many different things, for many different transitions in my life. And it's been really helpful, really supportive. So yeah, I would say that's the biggest misconception to think about and ponder a little bit on how you might deal with that when you come across.
Another thought that just comes into my mind. Now I just lost my train of thought because my Roomba is like right behind me right now. Let me think. It was more related to how people view counselor in a way that kind of go back to Angelica mentioned about the cultural piece. Not only that, like, oh, you're only dealing with crazy people. Oftentimes I hear students will come to me and say, like, don't you feel like tired and scary because all you hear is sad story all day long. And I think that's another misconception that if you are a counselor, therapist, psychologist, you're just hearing sad story all day long. And and you will eventually become sad as well. I want to debunk that because I feel like people sometimes are scared to be in this field because they feel like they're not ready. They can't be that person of constantly absorbing negative energy. I want to highlight that, yes, there are absolutely going to be days that you will come back home. Like I would come back home that I feel like a deflated balloon, that I am so tired. And at the same time, that speak to the importance of self-care. And I think that's what your no matter what program that you decide to go in, any kind of like graduate program, one of the key point that I'm always going to mention is how are you going to take care of yourself? What are you going to do in terms of setting emotional boundary? There, each of us eventually will create our own system, how to take off that therapist hat once we're off the clock. And then we put on our therapist hat again when it is time. So I want to encourage all of you to think about if you want to be in the field, yes, there'll be a moment that we will hear a lot of like really sad story and especially when we need to be vulnerable and empathetic. Um, and at the same time, we also hear a lot of happy stories. We hear stories when people recovered from whatever they're coming to see us, when we help them reach their therapeutic goals. Those are achievements that it's achievement that you witness and you see that smile on your client's face. Those are happy moments. So I just want to like encourage all of you to think about this is a career that absolutely has burnt out moment. Hence, self-care become extremely, extremely important. Setting those boundary, time boundary, emotional boundary. Also advocate for yourself. That another thing that people keep saying is if you want to be a counselor, you're not going to be rich. I think to a certain extent that can be true. We're not going to be making like Silicon Valley, like software engineering with like stock options. Most likely not. And at the same time, I want to highlight what Jessica mentioned earlier is the advocating for yourself, negotiating for what you're worth. Um, I think those are skills that we can develop and we can continuously get to the place where you can live comfortably. So I don't want to say that like, yes, you're gonna be poor forever. And at the same time, I also want to like have that mentality of there will be a moment that you may not make as much money and you will get to the point where you're able to live comfortably. So there is this balance also considered. We're not going to be someone in like private practice. Everyone think that private practice is where the money making's at. That's also not true. So those are just something to consider if we're thinking about financial speaking and also emotional health for your own.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Jojo just said about maintaining your balance, work-life balance and like self-care being super important, especially if you're considering this field and anywhere, whichever field you decide to go on. But especially if you want to go down this field, I too was pretty worried about being able to maintain that and if it would be too much. And then just figured out that I could do it after working. So that was really nice. Okay, so the misconception that I want to bring up is that there's this idea that therapists and counselors just come in and tell their clients what they're supposed to do and give advice about how they're supposed to live their lives. And I learned this in class, but I saw it play out more so in the work that I did in case management, that it's just not possible for you to tell clients what to do. First of all, it's their lives and they have autonomy. And as much as you'd like to like tell them to do certain things, that's not the role of the therapist and the counselor. Uh, it's your role more so if you decide to come into this path to sit with them through the difficult moments, show them what their choices are and what the consequences, both good and bad, of every decision they're considering, and then allow them to the chance to pick the best option for themselves versus saying like you can only do this and that's the best way to live. Like people often think counselors and psychologists are just life advisors. We're not. We don't know everything because we're human too, and like we don't have all the answers. And I think that's a pretty big misconception that um is not true at all.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Definitely a lot for people to think about, especially misconceptions. Um, Another way to reframe how we think about this field and what you all do. And our next question is more related to the theme. So going back to the theme about redefining success and cultivating meaningful careers. I just wanted to ask, since our students that we serve are undergraduate students, um, many times the markers of success for them, it may feel like it's related to grades or academic accolades. How do you all say that, or what do you think are ways that individuals can navigate the balance between pursuing traditional markers of success, academically or even in the workforce, and also prioritizing personal fulfillment and purpose in your career journeys and also your own definitions of success that you've created for yourself? Yeah, whoever would want to go first. Again, the question is just many times we think, markers of success are what we traditionally think about, especially as an undergrad students, I need the GPA, because you're thinking ahead, like I have to go to grad school, I need that GPA and so on.
I can actually share. I feel like that this particular questions was something that I struggle when I was a student here. A bit of a self-disclosure, I was a transfer student. So when I was enrolled to UCSD, it was a significant change for me since I need to switch from a semester system over to a quarter system. And at the time, I wasn't aware of how intensive a quarter system could be. I was like, nah, I could totally take 16 units. I took that in community college, no problem. I soon learned about that was not a great idea, maybe in like week 3 or 4. At the time, my ego still stopped me from dropping classes because like I got this, no problem. I think it was by week 9, I eventually dropped 1 or 2 of my classes with a W, which significantly impacted my GPA. I felt like at the moment, such a failure that I was not able to meet my personal standard. I wasn't even feel like I was there to tell my parents that like, oh, you paid so much for me to come here, and I got a really low GPA in the first quarter being at UCSD. So it was definitely very challenging for me. And one of the reason why I also shared that I took a lot of different classes is I need to take some classes to boost up my GPA eventually. But I want to use it as a story to share that first of all, yes, GPA, it's important in terms of like one of the way to measure your academic success. And at the same time, when we're applying for graduate school, if this is something students are interested in, GPA is also not the only marker that the professor or faculty will review. There are many other things that they look into it, including especially since the pandemic, a lot of the university actually take away GRE. So GRE is not even part of the requirement. So I want to share that the way how I view success is how are you able to demonstrate your ability when there are adversity in your life? How are you able to demonstrate your resilience going through those tough times? And I think all of us here, including our students here, have been through a lot of rough time throughout our life from different aspects of how we see it. Collectively, we all been through the pandemic. I have a special place for class of 2024 because it was a very rough class for class of 2024 from high school all the way to senior year. So heart to all the class of 2024. And I think that the way how I really view success is not only about your academic success or how much that you make, is you can always look back and tell yourself like, wow, look at all the things that you have accomplished. And thank you for not giving up. Thank you for keep moving forward. So, and you can continuously demonstrate to people that you care and love that when they are having a hard time, you can be there for them. So that is a different way of how I look success, not necessarily also about your title of how far you can go. It is how well are we doing in the role that we are in at the moment. So then in a larger picture, we create an understanding, compassionate environment for our community.
I definitely agree with you. And I am going to bring it back to kind of like my personal cultural perspective, because I really believe that success is going to be very unique to you in the face of your life that you're currently in. Sometimes I feel like we are fed this perspective that there's only one path and it's A through Z and it's A through C and that's it. You have to go in order. You have to follow these things. And that's the only way, right? From my cultural perspective, as I mentioned, I'm a first generation Mexican American, first one to go to college, first one to go to grad school. I didn't really have that guidance, but I did have a lot of pressure from my culture, from my family, that you must succeed. And yet every individual had a different definition of what Angelica would look like when she succeeds. But I needed to entertain the picture that I was going to paint. What did success look like for me in regards to my values, to what I wanted from life? How I got there, it's going to be very different. I can say I am not a test taker. I physically go into sweats till this very day. If somebody mentions that I have to take any kind of test, even if it's something for the DMV, it doesn't matter. But my strengths, I know my other strengths are in that human connection, in that human interaction. So I've come to learn with time that I know that I'm not a strong test taker and I'm okay with that because I have other strengths that I can definitely market that are very marketable and that people are going to look at any point of your career. And never once has anybody asked me about my GPA, except for grad school, of course. But or asked me what classes I took in undergrad or for grad school. Nobody's ever asked me that, but everybody has asked me, what experiences have I had that have built my character, that have built my value, that have built my perspective. So cultivating your picture of success.
I could go next. I have two main points that I wanted to talk about. The first one is that it's really easy when you step outside of the academic setting into the workplace setting, especially in the clinical sphere, to translate success into whether or not your clients do really well or not. And a lot of the times it feels really defining how much progress they're making to how much progress you're making as someone who is supporting them. But progress is really non-linear and it can look a certain way, but also be something entirely different. Like if we think on our own personal life journeys, we always go back and forth, right? Like if anyone's experienced like a breakup or grief of some form, like there are days where you feel like things are going super well and then you feel like you're 5 steps back, but that's just life. And a lot of the times supporting clients going through that and them taking what looks like steps backwards can feel really discouraging, especially if we're used to tracking like how far we're doing and how much progress we're making. So, okay, so the other thing I wanted to talk about was advice I was given in my last year of undergrad. And this person told me that as long as you figured out what kind of career you want, what job you truly want at the end, because a lot of clinical counseling degrees require grad schools to get you to that place, right? As long as you figured out what your ideal career looks like, there's so many paths to get to that point. And hindsight is 2020. You can look back and it can feel like, oh, it made perfect sense. But when you're looking ahead and you don't know what spots you're going to be in, it can be really confusing and scary. And that's totally okay. Because if we think about like every professor we had, they're all professors, but they all got there in really different ways. And that applies completely like now too. Like if you're looking ahead to grad schools and say you do want to become a psychologist in the future, there's so many ways to become a psychologist, a variety of degrees, different type of clinical roles you can pick up or non-clinical roles that will ultimately get you to where you want to be. And your version of success will be your authentic version of what that is, and you'll paint it throughout the way you're paving your way forward. And that might look completely different from someone else's, and that's okay because you have your own interests and your own passions that have led you there, and you're going to keep pursuing all of those particular things that you're interested in.
Okay, so I kind of mentioned that I took a less traditional path. I think it's really easy. Obviously, we all went to UCSD. We know that pressure. So you're going to find out how old I am now. I graduated 22 years ago. I was in college during September 11th. I am originally from New Jersey, and I grew up going into New York City pretty regularly. So I ended up withdrawing from a bunch of classes after September 11th because I had my own stuff going on, obviously. And I had sort of also, I think all of us come into UCSD very high achieving. We would not have gotten into UCSD if we were not high achieving perfectionists before we applied. So I was already burnt out when I got to college. I figured out that if I didn't put in a ton of effort, I could get a B minus. And that sounded like a very efficient use of my energy. Because granted, again, this was late 90s, early 2000s. I didn't fully understand what I needed to do to get to a doctoral program, because I thought the only thing I knew going in was clinical psychologist. So I was going to be a clinical psychologist and I was going to get either a PhD or a PsyD. Well, if you all saw the flyer, you see that I went to National University for my master's. There were several reasons. One of them is that a lot of graduate programs expect you to take out loans to live off of, not just to pay for the program. Another reason is because in National University, it's one class at a time, evenings, weekends, and I was supporting myself and I couldn't conceptualize doing it any other way besides continuing to work full time and only taking out loans for the school portion of things. Another reason is because my undergraduate GPA wasn't good enough to go directly into a doctoral program. And it actually wasn't good enough to get into USD programs, even though I interviewed extremely well. But I say that not because, I want you guys to look at me and be like, well, what's her problem? Besides that I'm blonde. I want it to be an understanding that like has been mentioned, like Ellie has mentioned, you can take whatever path to get there. Like, for me, that success is perseverance. It is finding a way to do what you want, and also flexibility in getting there. Because out of undergrad, I've been an administrative assistant. I worked a lot of office jobs. And then I said, I want to use my degree. So I started working at group homes as staff with what's classified as SED boys. Severely emotionally disturbed boys in the foster care system. And So that was really my introduction to working in the field with a bachelor's degree. And to let you guys know, if you do that, it is pretty physical work. It is, I have a huge heart for it. I love it. I still love that population so much. It's one of my favorites. But eventually it was like, you know what, it's time to get my master's. But it was through that experience working at the group home where I met the therapists for the clients and found out about master's level clinicians. And then, you know, I looked at a bunch of different graduate programs. I actually almost went to Drexel for dance and movement therapy instead, but the licensure path wasn't clear. But there were so many different things I did before I decided, okay, licensed marriage and family therapy is what I want to do. And so I thought I knew. And I think that that success really comes from finding a way to still pursue your passions and that flexibility in, you know, understanding that your path there, your life, as you originally imagined it, may end up looking a little bit different. And I say that because I know for every single one of us who went to UCSD, that is a very hard thing to let go of that preconceived idea of what our future was going to look like and find a different way. And then also there is still that pressure of, hey, to this day, my father still asks me if I want to get a doctoral degree because I was planning on being the first one with a doctoral degree in my family. I think my dad's the first one in my family to get a master's, but you know, to this day, I'm in my 40s and my father still, hey, do you want to get a doctoral degree? Like, I just finished paying off my student loans. No, thank you. So again, the flexibility I think really helps.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, everyone. That is, it's one of my favorite topics for these themes. So it's really great to hear everyone's stories. But we are wrapping up close to 4 o'clock. So I do want to give some links in the chat. But first of all, thank you everyone so much for attending today's sessions. I do believe that we have our panelist bios in our chat. It was sent earlier in the session, and we also sent it out through email to all our students who registered for this event. So some of our panelists have their LinkedIn or other contact information on those panelists' bios. So if you ever wanted to talk more with them or reach out to them, definitely use those contact informations. Again, we had such amazing panelists in this session, and I wish it was longer so we could hear more. One of my favorite questions was like, what is a rewarding aspect of your field? But if you wanted that information from them directly, you'd have to contact them. And then also we do have our networking session up next. So if you're interested in participating in that, go ahead and check out our Careers in Mind webpage so that you can connect. I believe some of our panelists in this session and in previous sessions will be present there, so you can talk to them more in those breakout rooms in that Zoom meeting. And then lastly, our CCR. Our CCR was sent in the chat, so if you go ahead and fill that out, so you can get credit for being here today. But other than that, I will go ahead and say goodbye. Hopefully I see you all in the networking session next. But thank you all for coming today. And again, thank you to our amazing panelists for their wonderful stories and advice they've given you all today. And me too, I've learned a lot just from being in this panel today. So have a good rest of your day. And you can all choose to exit or again, save those panelist bios and go to the next networking session to connect with more panelists.